Hello, welcome back. This is going to be Africa's Mystery Apes Part 5. In Part 4, we've already established that human hybridization with animals is possible and is the probable cause of phenotypic variation in human beings, and is probably why we have different races of humans. If this is the case, if humans have crossed with apes, there should be gene flow and therefore, traits from humans found in apes and ape traits found in humans. Right, so it goes both ways. So I want to examine some pictures of apes, hands, and human hands. In this picture here, what we're looking at a typical orangutan hand here. Now notice the thumb is very far back and very, very tiny on the hand, and that's a human hand there, which you'll all recognize, has a large, well-developed thumb. And orangutan hand, because they are adapted to swinging in the trees, it's more like a sort of hook, with long fingers, doesn't need much of a thumb. And here we got a bonobo's hand, and you can see again it's got a tiny little thumb far back. You see the human thumb is in line with this first crease here, this first joint, the tip of the thumb, right? A few more or less. And this one on an ape is far back here. Yeah. And on a human it's more like that, isn't it? More in line with that joint. Same with an orangutan, it's further back. Now I found a picture of an orangutan with a thumb that appears to have almost the same proportions as a human hand. Look at this one here. The thumb is very long and well developed, and forward. This part here it's almost exactly the same proportions as a human hand. Very unusual. Look at pictures of ape hands and you'll see that apes have a very different shaped hand with the thumb further back, whether it be gorillas, orangutans, or chimps. This one here, I don't know if this is a orangutan or a gorilla, but you could see tiny thumb. Yeah, really tiny thumb. Another gorilla hand here, tiny little thumb. In fact, a gorilla's feet look more like a human hand. That's a gorilla. So this one just like a human hand. Very, very unusual. But if I'm correct that there has been gene flow between humans and orangutans, then yes, that's what we should expect to find. We should expect to find every now and again amongst the orangutan population or the gorilla population, whatever, chimpanzee, if they've been hybridizing with humans, then gene flow will be both ways, and you'll find some human traits in the apes. In the next picture, I want to look at the eyes of these Aboriginals from Australia. So, okay, first thing is dark pigmentation. That's what gorillas have got, and these people have got dark pigmentation. That's obvious. Look at the eyes. The iris goes all the way over the eye, and very little of the white of the eye is visible. If we look at the human eye, the white of the eye is very prominent. There's a lot of white showing. This is unusual in vertebrates, animals, because a lot of animals don't, the white of the eye doesn't show. So there's a human, and we're going to look at gorilla. Gorilla's eyes, the whites of the eye don't show, and the whites of the eye are pigmented. The sclera, that bit. Whites of the eye pigmented. The white of the eye visible on human beings. Now, this one here, he says, I wonder what's causing the whites of my eyes to become brown. I'm an African American. And he wonders, he says here, I'm an African American, I wonder what's causing the whites of my eyes to become brown. The most common cause of the whites of the eyes take on a brownish and sometimes blotchy color in African Americans is melanin pigment in the surface tissue of the eye. Black people share this trait with gorillas, and apparently so do Aboriginals. So the logical question to ask now is, how on earth could Australian Aboriginals have crossed with apes when there's no apes in Australia? We all know that Africans share the same forest with the great apes, but what about the Australian Aboriginals? Well, on this channel here, Where's My Yowie? This man reads stories, newspaper articles from the 1800s, when Australia was being settled, it was being explored, and there are dozens of stories, of reports, of sightings of large apes in Australia, coming from the Australian Aboriginals themselves, who are convinced that they exist and live in fear of them, and the local white settlers as well, who are also seeing them. And in this report here, this guy McCooey, who is a zoologist, he reports seeing a gorilla-type creature. He reckons it's a gorilla. And there's also, they've discovered a dead body of a skeleton in a cave. And he says the local Aboriginals all know about these gorillas. He says it's about 5 foot tall, the one he saw. The skeleton in the cave is about 4 foot tall. So these are same size range as a gorilla. And there's dozens and dozens of such reports. So that's gorillas. Here's another report. I mean, there's dozens. It's just some examples. You can look them up on this channel. For farmers harassed by a gorilla. It says here, this chap read a report about an Australian gorilla, and there were official hunts organised in the 1800s to try and capture one. On this channel, Yowie Hunter's witness reports, this lady in Australia reports having seen what she thinks was a orangutan, and she describes it in great detail. Here's a picture, an artist's rendition of it, what she saw. It seems to be intermediate between a human and an orangutan. The fur is an orangutan's fur, and the eyes look like an orangutan's eyes, but the nose intermediate between a human and an ape, because an ape doesn't really have a nose. This thing, you can see from the picture here, even more like an orangutan. Dark pigmentation, reddish, long hair. And this thing appeared when the woman was alone, and then when she was joined by her male companion, this ape lost interest, indicated that it was disappointed to discover that she had a male companion, and then it ran off. So this thing had an interest in a lone female human. That's what I'm saying.
Like creature. It's waving its arms up and down, like it was very happy to see me. I was surprised. I just stood there looking at it. It had a grin, I could say, on its face, and it started walking. It was walking towards me. And I said to my friend who was sitting behind me, he was sitting down, I said, "Hey, have your neighbours got monkeys?" That was the only thing I could think of. An orangutan had escaped from the zoo, or someone had been keeping animals illegally there. And it was walking until my friend stood up, and then that stopped. Then we went inside, and you don't talk about these things, though. It was really strange that we didn't talk about it, because I couldn't decipher what I'd seen.
And it's not just amateurs and members of the public that have seen apes in Australia. This man, Hermann Klaatsch, was one of the top primatologists in the world. He wasn't an amateur, he wasn't just Mr. Nobody, he wasn't a farmer. He was the top primatologist in the world, and he went on an expedition and discovered a tribe of human ape hybrids, the so-called Australian Yowie, in 1907. So for those who want scientific proof or acknowledgement by the scientific community, and this is what I've written here, okay? Hermann Klaatsch, and this is his Wikipedia page, just to show you that this guy was a real dude. Professor at the University of Heidelberg. This is in the old days, the good old days when scientific research was real and actual progress and discoveries were being made. It's all been covered up since. So there you go, that's Hermann Klaatsch. And Klaatsch says that the Yowies, the way they behave, was very much like an orangutan, that the males would capture the females and rape them. That's their normal way of mating, and this is what orangutans do. They rape the females. It's not exactly consensual, it's just their way. So this is shared behavior with orangutans. They had upright posture, this particular tribe that he discovered. I think they had red hair or auburn hair like an orangutan. He says that the Yowies build a nest out of boughs. So this is what gorillas are known to do, and I believe orangutans. So this is great ape behavior. And he said that they were intermediate between humans and apes. So we got shared traits and intermediate forms being cited in Australia. There's also a report of an Aboriginal medicine man who was almost as hairy as an orangutan. Another report from the 1800s, they report meeting an Australian Aboriginal medicine man who was as hairy as an orangutan. I showed you a picture in my other video, my last one I think, of a hairy Aboriginal with hair on his arms and shoulders, but he wasn't as hairy as an orangutan. Well, this guy reports one that is.
No doubt the old Aborigine, who was the most powerful man and almost as hairy as an orangutan.
So almost as hairy as an orangutan. So we've got intermediate forms between ape and human in Australia. It's a hybridisation zone. That's why the Australian Aboriginals look so peculiar. And they have, in their own folklore, stories about apes in Australia. Now you're going to be wondering, how on earth does an animal like a orangutan, which is only found in Sumatra and Borneo, two little tiny islands, how does it find its way down to Australia? Okay, so here we got the map of the world. Now let me explain. Only up until 100 years ago, the range of the orangutan was huge, actually. Orangutans were not just limited to two tiny islands somewhere around here. 100 years ago, they were found all the way across India, China, Southeast Asia, all along, and why not Australia? According to the Australian Aboriginals, there are apes here, so let's say here. And the reason the people in India and China and Southeast Asia, they persecuted the orangutans. And the reason for that is that orangutans are very troublesome, problematic animals. They are real pests. Contrary to what the conservationists and the tree huggers will tell you, orangutans really fancy human females and they will rape them whenever they can. And there are countless examples of this, countless documented records of this in modern times. If you read Baruti Galdicus's books, her book, she mentions that, and there's another book by Linda Spalding's book about Baruti Galdicus. She mentions another rape, and rapes are frequent. Okay, orangutans are always attacking women. So whenever the farmers saw orangutans, they would kill them, and they wiped them out. So if orangutans are frequently raping women, this would explain stories about the orang pendek and other upright walking ape men spotted in the jungles of Southeast Asia and Vietnam and places like that. That would explain also the stories of the Australian Aboriginals, the Yowies. They're very destructive creatures as well, orangutans. They're always stealing. They're natural thieves and rapists, and they're very destructive and just vindictive, horrible pests. This is the truth. This is not from a tree hugger who's trying to raise money for conservation. I'm just an objective person. Important to mention some behavioural traits that the Australian Aboriginals share with the orangutan. One is infant cannibalism. It's possible to find newspaper articles written in the 1800s and in the 1900s about the Australian Aboriginals' cannibalistic behaviour. They were cannibals. That's how they got most of their food. They had frequent skirmishes with other villages, and they would kill each other and they would eat each other. That was their main food source. Their staple diet was human flesh. This has all been downplayed, and what the communists will always do is create a sort of romantic image about natives or any kind of minority population. Make out that they're a sort of noble, savage, perfectly in harmony with their environment and eco-friendly, when in reality the Australian Aboriginal was a very destructive person, just like the orangutan. Very wasteful and destructive. The Australian Aboriginals turned most of Australia into a desert through their very destructive practices. They would set fire, they would create bushfires to drive game, and they just burnt up practically the whole of the continent. Anyway, they were cannibals, Australian Aboriginals, and the women had a real taste for infant flesh. They used to eat their own babies, and that was their form of contraception. If they had a child, they didn't want it, they would eat it, and they really liked it. They really enjoyed it, and it was very difficult for the Christian missionaries to persuade them not to do this, because they just couldn't see anything wrong with it. Well, infant cannibalism is known in orangutans as well, and we have some papers here that have documented it in the wild. So orangutans will eat their own infants. We know that chimpanzees and gorillas will also do that. So this is a ape behavior that has found its way into the human population. This is a trait, a behavioral trait that's heritable. Behavior is inheritable. Definitely is. That's why you can breed a certain breed of dog, like whatever kind of breed of dog, you can breed them for aggression. The temperament can be inherited. You can have very affectionate breeds of dogs. You can have very aggressive breeds of dogs. You can have dogs like pointers that will do specific postures. That's all inherited. So behavior most definitely is heritable. And that's why we can use it as a trait to track the introgression of ape behavioral traits into the human population. That's exactly what we see. Yeah, and infanticide is also known in mountain gorillas, and everybody knows that chimpanzees are mad keen on it as well. I want to give an example now of this. This is a half ape, half human, right? He's living with an African tribe in the Congo. And this is by Paul Duchaillu. Again from the 1800s. This is when all the good science was done. And he was a French-American traveller, zoologist, anthropologist, and explorer. He went down into the Congo, the first modern European outsider to confirm the existence of gorillas, and later the pygmies of Central Africa. So this guy discovered gorillas and pygmies. This guy was a big deal, all right? This was a big wig, a respected, serious guy. He wasn't making anything up. He was the real deal. Here is an account of Paul de Chaillu's experience in the Congolese province of Katanga. And this is cited in Brian Sykes' book, The Nature of the Beast. It's a book about the Yeti. And Brian Sykes is dead now, died a couple of years ago, about 4 years ago, drank himself to death. He was an alcoholic. And he was professor of human genetics at Oxford University. And his job was to cover up the existence of human-ape hybrids. And because his life was a lie, he drank all the time. And he was under pressure to lie all the time. But in this book, he cites this story. And this is from Paul de Chaillu, and this is the real deal. One day an extraordinary individual appeared. I say individual, he looked more like a gorilla than a human. He stood about 5'9" in height, judging from my own height. His legs were slightly thicker than the ordinary natives, and his arms were a good deal stronger. His body was covered in hair, but it was not as thick as that of a baboon, while his head much resembled that of the very intelligent apes one sees in zoos. Yet there was a very human expression about it too. It was a half-native type of countenance, with protruding jaw and low receding forehead. Neither man nor monkey. The nose was flat, the normal type of native nose. He had startling black eyes, brighter and more searching than those of a native. His hair was similar to a native's, except that it was longer. When de Chaillu inquired which tribe the unusual individual belonged to, he was told that it was the offspring of a native woman and a gorilla father. He had come to the tribe as a boy, had just wandered in, as it were, and no one knew whence he came. He had, however, lived with the tribe since the day of his arrival, and had in time acquired all the tribal ways. I spoke through the interpreter to the chief, who informed me that he had seen similar specimens in the forest, and thought that there were many such crosses in gorilla country. And Brian Sykes now writes, I later came across the same story in Hedley Chilver's book, The 7 Lost Trails of Africa, which puts the year of de Chaillu's encounter as 1913 and adds a comment by the anthropologist Raymond Dart, Professor Dart, based in Johannesburg, who was the first to describe the species Australopithecus afarensis, that's the Lucy fossil, is quoted as saying that there was nothing impossible in the abduction and impregnation of a human female by a male gorilla, leading by implication to the birth of a hybrid child. Okay, so we've got Professor Raymond Dart, if you want to look him up, he's a real big deal. We've got Brian Sykes, and we've got Paul de Chaillu. We've also got Hermann Klaatsch, all saying the same thing, that human hybrid apes exist. And that's what these big hairy specimens that we call Bigfoots or Yowies are. They've all either seen them firsthand, or that they accept the accounts of others that these things can definitely exist. There's also chimps with human traits. This famous case called Oliver the Upright Walking Chimpanzee. If you haven't already heard of it, you need to check it out, but
there was also a suspected human-chimp hybrid. Dubbed Oliver, he was brought to the U.S. from Africa in the 70s and presented as the missing link between the two species. The bold claim was even made that Oliver possessed 47 chromosomes, one more than man and one less than the typical chimpanzee. Regardless of this ploy to sell tickets, Oliver was indeed different. He appeared to look human, even adorned with a pattern of baldness. He had a soft voice, and his demeanor was equally as welcoming, especially the ladies. From living with his trainers, he quickly learned how to use tools, do chores, and picked up on human habits, even drinking coffee. Oliver even walked upright. Although uncharacteristic of his species, in 1996, the University of Chicago revealed that Oliver had the same number of chromosomes as all other chimpanzees.
So she just dismisses the whole thing by saying, oh, well, they did some clever genetic science and they discovered the number of chromosomes, blah, blah, blah. But do we really know that they discovered the number of chromosomes were the same as a normal chimpanzee? Or maybe they even were the same number. Doesn't mean it wasn't a hybrid, because that can happen too. That you get that's the thing with hybrids. It can go either way. Again, she's trying to put, the doubt. You see, 100 years ago, nobody was in any doubt that these hybrids occurred. Everybody accepted it, and all the top experts agreed. But now, since science has basically come to a standstill 100 years ago, and we have this genetic tomfoolery going on in labs where you can't see anything, they mix some chemicals together in a test tube, and they say, right, well, that tells us the truth, right? But in the old days, they actually used to go out and look. All right, so what we're looking at now, they're saying, is this a human or an ape or an ape hybrid? And what the experts will say, well, no, it's just a bald chimpanzee. And you'll find a lot of these bald chimpanzees. You look for it, hairless chimpanzees, hairless apes. You find lots of these pictures on the internet, and they'll say it's just a rare skin condition where some apes get this condition and all their hair drops out. Okay, that may be, but what is the cause of this condition? We accept that it has a condition where it has no hair. We accept that. But could it be that this is more evidence of the integration of human traits into the chimpanzee population due to hybridization in Africa? This is a human trait, right? A hairless body is a human trait, and we're seeing a chimpanzee with this trait. So this could be from a human ancestor. It could also be that the people that we find with hypertrichosis, these what they call wolf boys, or these people that are covered in hair all over their body, they say it's a rare condition. They just dismiss it, saying it's a rare syndrome. It could be that they've got that trait from an animal ancestor. So could apes coming from Africa, which we think now, we've seen plenty of evidence, is a hybridization zone between humans and apes. Could apes coming out of the jungle like this Oliver, the walking upright ape, could he be evidence of another human trait finding its way into the ape population, upright walking posture? That's a behavioral or a physical trait that comes from humans.
Human-chimpanzee hybrid.
Oliver's photograph shocked the world, and in the media frenzy that followed, he became an international celebrity. In Japan, his human-like behavior earned him cult status.
Okay, he's found human upright posture, which is a human trait in a chimpanzee from Africa. We also find African tribal chiefs that have a very similar social structure, social behavior to gorillas, where the male is, you have one dominant male. He has ownership of all the females. He mates with all the females. He has sometimes hundreds of children with all the females in the tribe. This is African tribal behavior. And this is exactly the same as what gorillas do. So I've shown animal traits in humans, human traits in animals. I think while we're at it, what we consider sexual abuse of children by human beings, this behavior, whether you like it or not, the fact is that it's complex behavior and it's come from somewhere. And these people that do it, they're very, very determined about it. They consider it perfectly natural and perfectly good to do it. So where's this come from? Well, I found in Linda Spaulding's book, A Dark Place in the Jungle, she goes to Borneo to try and track down Burrutigaldicus, because Burrutigaldicus is the lady who has, this is her here, with orangutans. She's got a lot of orangutans in a sanctuary down there. She does research on them, although she's published hardly any of her work. I mean, she's pretty much a charlatan and just a profiteer. This is what Spaulding discovers. But while Spaulding is down there amongst these apes, she discovers a lot of very interesting details about their behavior. And one of the things that female orangutans do is that they will perform fellatio on their male offspring. Yeah, they'll perform fellatio on their own offspring. She witnessed it. Linda Spalding did. Now that's kind of disgusting, but these apes do a lot of very disgusting things, right? They are very destructive and weird animals. But this behavior is also found in certain ethnic groups of human beings, who I have already said in previous videos, this particular group that we're going to look at now, the Jews, the Orthodox Jews, not all Jews, like he says, some, because Jews are a very mixed race, they've got traits from different species in them, right? So some are going to do this, some are going to do that, going to be highly variable. But according to Luke McKee in this video that we're just about to watch a clip of, it is actually codified into their laws and into their religion, this behavior. So it's important to them. And also bear in mind that during the Spanish Inquisition, anyone with red hair was considered to be a Jew. So the red hair, that comes from Jews. And the red hair, obviously, like I showed in my videos before, Judaism comes from India. It's the worship of Shiva. And that's where the orangutans first hybridized with human beings to create the red. That's where the red hair gene got into the human population, and probably a lot of other genes too.
There are three groups I call the Kabbalah axis of evil. There are three main groups that are normalizing pedophilia and are most successful doing it, and they all have that one thing in common. And I'm 90% of Jewish people are fine. Who are not in Orthodox Jewry, which has a doctrine of doing an oral sex act on babies, called mitzvah b'peh in Hebrew. If they are allowed to do that, others are allowed to normalize pedophilia. Just 2 days ago, if you go to the front page of band.video, or whatever they're calling it now, from Alex Jones, who is intelligence, the Stratfor emails, we've all seen them, you'll see that there's a professor in New York that just came out defending the right of grandmas to do oral fellatio on babies to calm them down, and said it's completely natural to have sex with a child. And obviously
let's just, because this is so important, screen share. Can you share shit as we go along?
Okay. Yes, I will share my screen. I'll just share my whole screen. Okay, why not? You can. Okay, so I'll just go to my Telegram. Okay, and so those are some images which I was going to refer to in this call, and everything I say comes from research. So that video I just spoke of is right here, loading on my screen. MSM promotes the rape of 1-year-old babies. Okay, so that's Alex Jones. Why not have Fox News? Okay, SUNY professor under review for supporting pedophilia. So obviously it's wrong for a gay professor. It's New York Post saying the same thing.
All right, the main thing then that we get from this is that the Orthodox Jews have a name for this thing. This is part of their behavior, right? They got a name for it, where Jewish mothers or grandmothers comfort their male offspring by performing oral sex on them. And this is exactly what Linda Spalding describes in her book, A Dark Place in the Jungle. This is what orangutans do to their children, to send them to sleep or whatever. Because this is forbidden by human beings. Humans have got laws against this. This is not normal behavior. We know what normal human behavior is. It's been codified in law. We wouldn't have laws that forbid us from doing our natural behavior, so therefore it's not a natural behavior. Laws have come about because aberrant behavior arises in the human population. It has arisen in the past, and it continues to do so because behavioral traits are genetically inherited, and therefore there's been contamination, there's been crossbreeding with another species that has introduced abnormal behavior into the human population. Can't find that damn book. Let me find it on Amazon. Oh, here we go. Look, Dark Place in the Jungle, Linda Spalding. Abnormal behavior has started to appear in human population, just in the same way that abnormal physical characteristics and traits have appeared because of crossbreeding with apes. All right, I was going to go into the Rwandan genocide. And basically, 100 years ago, the science of phrenology was well developed. That was looking at anatomical traits, anatomical differences in the shapes of the head and the body to distinguish races. And there were 2 tribes in the Congo, in the Central African jungle, in Rwanda, right? 3 tribes actually. The Pygmies, who were very small, tiny people. They had a small stature, so stature, that is an ape-like trait, right? Small stature. Apes are short. They also make nests in trees, these pygmies. These are the Twa pygmies of Rwanda. So that's another behavioral trait that they've got from apes. Then you've got the Hutus, who were shorter people. You've got the Hutus and the Tutsis, right? Tutsis were tall. They had an aquiline nose, a developed nose like a human being, a long nose. And they were taller. They had human-like stature, in other words. They were more organized and they were cattle herders. Then you've got the Hutus, who were more numerous, 80% or so of the population. They had a more ape-like face, a wider, less developed nose, shorter in stature. These Hutus and these Tutsis were in enmity with each other. They were always rising up and killing the other in these genocides every 20 years or so. The Belgians and the Germans 100 years ago, the colonial authorities recognized these 2 races, these 3 different races, the Twa pygmies, the Hutus and the Tutsis, and they recognized the anatomical behavioral differences between them. The Tutsis, the taller, more aquiline, considered themselves descendants of Egyptians. And the important point about them being Egyptians is that Egyptians were very technologically advanced, very organized, civilized people back in the day. Not today, but back in, 3,000 years ago they were. And it was known, it was recognized, acknowledged by scientists 100 years ago that they were white people in Egypt. Therefore, the Tutsis have got more white human genetics. And the Hutus, who are more numerous in the Congo, they take more after the ape. Very violent people. There's a lot of cannibalism as well goes on in the Congo. I don't know if the Hutus are particularly known for it, but they are very cruel. If you read about the Hutus and their behavior towards animals, incredibly, they just don't have any pity or any sympathy for animals at all. Or each other, they're just very, very inhuman. So the Hutus, the Twa, and the Tutsis, these tribes are formed because of varying degrees of admixture and hybridization between humans and apes. Right? Some are more human, some are more ape. That's why they're different. And the Egyptians, the ancient Egyptians, were acknowledged to have been originally white people, and that is why the Tutsis are said to take more after the Egyptians. And there's quite a few articles about that you can read. They're always kind of coming from the modern day critical race theory position. They're very sort of Marxist, and these modern articles are very, very biased against phrenology. They don't like the idea of phrenology. They believe that phrenology was a pseudoscience, and that the idea that races have any difference between them is the cause of the genocide, that we should simply ignore the differences between the races, and then we'll have peace. And it's quite contradictory. It says that the difference between the Hutus and the Tutsis was that the Hutus were they were the majority, but they were oppressed by the Tutsis. The Tutsis thought they were superior because the Belgians had told them they were descended from white people. Therefore, the Tutsis became a very conceited and superior minority who oppressed the Hutus, and the Hutus were smaller in stature and had different shaped heads because they had a poor diet. But then it goes on to say that it's not true that the Tutsis were all rich and the Hutus were all poor. Some of the Hutus were rich as well. So presumably the rich Hutus had same diet as the rich Tutsis. If that's the case, why did they look any different if it's all down to diet? It's just rubbish. It says here the two are the same DNA. Again, they're using DNA to, they ignore all the physical and behavioral differences, and they just concentrate on the DNA, which is a very, very, it's so complicated, DNA, and you can't just, you have to have access to a lab and all these chemicals and all that. Anybody can look at photos and see phenotypic data. You can just see it by looking at it. Right? It's accessible. DNA has to be done by a professor in a lab. Blah de blah de blah. It's a brilliant way of covering things up. Is what I'm saying. Anyway, these are Tutsis, and notice they've got togas on. Right. I did videos about the toga, showing that the kilt from Scotland, the great kilt, is the toga. Oh yes, I would like to just quickly mention that gorillas are believed. Well, most people think that gorillas are just harmless vegetarians. I mean, they do look very angry, very fierce. They've got huge canines and very fierce, aggressive-looking faces, and they do attack people all the time. They're very dangerous. They don't need to be provoked. They will just attack innocent human beings. You can see video footage of that. They're very aggressive creatures. But the conservationists will always portray them as very peaceful, harmless animals, which is complete nonsense. They're rapists, and they attack people for no reason. But they also are believed to have they eat animals. They kill monkeys and things, and they are far from the harmless vegetarian that just eats leaves and bananas that conservationists would have you believe. And I found a video of Arjunus van der Planets back in the day, and he said that he'd met up with a filmmaker who discovered that gorillas were actually eating meat in the wild. They were hunting and eating meat, and this was all covered up, and the guy was going to make a video about it, a documentary, and that never surfaced. And a lot of people think that Arjunus van der Planets got it mixed up, but it turns out that when they do DNA tests on gorilla feces, it turns out that gorillas will eat monkeys and all sorts of other animals, and it stands to reason because gorillas are very large, aggressive-looking creatures. So Arjunus van der Planets was correct about that. So what else are they lying about? A lot about gorillas. These animals are not the cuddly tree huggers that we've been led to believe they are. Alright, I think that covers most of what I wanted to cover today. Thank you very much for watching. I'm going to put all these links in the description box. Catch you next time.